Imagine a time when kids rode in cars without seatbelts. Doctors recommended cigarettes, and radioactive makeup was all the rage. Sounds bizarre? Welcome to the 1950s. The post-World War II era was marked by optimism, but also a lack of regulation. Beneath the charm of jukeboxes and poodle skirts, a very different set of rules defined daily life. These were rules that would raise serious eyebrows or even legal alarms today. Many now illegal or unsafe behaviors were completely normal then. Today, we're listing off 15 things that were normal in the 1950s but are now illegal, restricted, or considered dangerous. In the 1950s, asbestos was a miracle material, fire-resistant, durable, and cheap. It was used in everything from ceiling tiles and insulation to floorboards. There was even asbestos in ironing boards. But no one knew, or chose to admit, how deadly it was. Asbestos exposure would eventually be linked to mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer, along with a host of respiratory diseases. Today, its use is heavily restricted or banned in many countries, including the US for most applications. But in the 1950s, it was just another day on the job. Lead paint was the shiny, long-lasting go-to for every picture-perfect home. Whether it was the baby's crib or the kitchen cabinets, lead was everywhere. But the danger was invisible. Lead exposure in children has been linked to learning disabilities, developmental delays, and behavioral issues. It wasn't until the late 1970s that the US government finally banned its use in residential homes. But for families in the 50s, it was just home decor. Picture this: you're boarding a plane in 1955. The stewardess offers you peanuts and an ashtray. In the 50s, smoking wasn't just allowed in public, it was totally encouraged. Doctors endorsed cigarette brands. Cigarette ads ran on primetime TV. You could light up in restaurants, hospitals, and even maternity wards. It wasn't until decades of research and lung cancer statistics too grim to ignore that sweeping bans began. Today, smoking a cigarette is banned in most places. It would be even harder to find anyone who smokes indoors. In the 1950s, hitchhiking was practically a rite of passage. Soldiers, students, and everyday folks relied on the kindness of strangers to get from point A to point B. It was seen as safe, efficient, and even patriotic during wartime fuel rations. But as crime rates rose in the 70s and notorious serial killer cases made headlines, the tide turned. Hitchhiking was no longer safe. It became extremely risky. While not outright illegal in all places, laws today often restrict where and how you can hitchhike. Back then, it was just how people got around. Today, we think of childhood as a time for school, play, and protection. But in the 1950s, many children were already part of the workforce. From delivering newspapers before sunrise to working long hours on farms or in family businesses, child labor was common and mostly legal. The Fair Labor Standards Act had been passed in 1938, but enforcement was spotty, especially in agriculture and rural areas. Now, child labor laws are strictly enforced, but for many 1950s kids, work came long before recess. Yes, you heard that right. Radioactive products were all the rage. In the 1950s, radium and thorium were marketed as health-boosting miracles. Beauty creams, toothpaste, even bottled water promised vitality, glowing skin, and strong bones. All thanks to a dose of radioactivity. It was a deadly misunderstanding. Exposure to radioactive materials can cause severe radiation sickness, cancer, and death. But back then, the science wasn't widely understood. Today, of course, such products would be banned instantly. But in the 50s, people quite literally glowed with pride. Swear in front of your parents in the 1950s? You weren't just grounded, you got a mouthful of soap. Literally. This method of discipline was portrayed as normal, even loving. It was seen as a harmless way to teach manners and consequences. Popular sitcoms even joked about it. But we now know that soap ingestion, especially in larger amounts, can cause vomiting, diarrhea, or even poisoning. Most child welfare agencies now consider it a form of abuse. What was once just tough love is now a red flag. Back in the 1950s, ads were often divided by gender, with listings like Help Wanted, male, and Help Wanted, female. The classified job listing sections were a reflection of the era's deeply ingrained gender roles. It was both socially accepted and written into policy. Employers made it clear: men for management, women for support. This legally sanctioned discrimination remained until Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned sex-based hiring. Today, any job posting that specific gender without legitimate cause, illegal. Once a staple in American medicine cabinets, Ipecac syrup was handed out like cough syrup. Swallow it and you'd vomit. Doctors and parents used it to treat poisoning. But here's the problem: it wasn't always effective. And in the wrong hands, it became a tool for eating disorders. By the early 2000s, the FDA declared it unsafe and pulled its over-the-counter status. So while Ipecac might trigger a nostalgic memory for some, it's no longer considered safe. Yes, lobotomies. These brutal procedures involved severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. Doctors believed it cured everything from depression to unruly behavior. The most infamous case? Rosemary Kennedy, sister to President John F. Kennedy. Her failed lobotomy left her disabled for life. By the 1960s and 70s, lobotomies were largely abandoned in favor of medication and therapy. Today, performing one would be criminal. In the 1950s, DDT was the miracle pesticide. It was everywhere. On farms, in backyards, even sprayed directly on people to fight mosquitoes. But studies later revealed its devastating effect on wildlife, especially birds, and potential health risks to humans. Rachel Carson's 1962 book, Silent Spring, sparked a movement. By 1972, the U.S. banned DDT for agricultural use. What was once a household name is now a cautionary tale. Before modern waste disposal systems, Americans simply burned their trash in open pits, barrels, or backyards. It was legal, it was normal, and it was toxic. Burning household waste releases harmful chemicals into the air and soil. Today, backyard burning is illegal in most places due to fire hazards and pollution. What seemed like a simple solution turned out to be a serious environmental threat. Drinking and driving? In the 1950s, it was common and barely frowned upon. Police might pull you over and tell you to drive safer, not arrest you. There were no breathalyzers, no strict limits. DUIs weren't taken seriously until the 1980s, when organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, pushed for reform. Now, impaired driving is a serious offense. Laws, technology, and cultural norms have caught up with common sense. In the post-war boom, packaging was cheap, disposable, and everywhere. So were the wrappers, bottles, and cigarette butts people tossed out of cars or dropped in parks. There were no public service campaigns, no fines, no guilt. That changed with campaigns in the 60s and 70s, especially the famous Crying Indian ad in 1971. Now, littering is illegal in most parts of the country and heavily fined. One of the most shocking norms of the 1950s was the marriage bar, a policy that forced women to quit their jobs once they got married. This was a workplace policy, especially for teachers and office workers. Employers believed married women should stay home. Their careers ended at I do. By the mid-20th century, social pressure and lawsuits slowly dismantled the marriage bar. Today, such a rule would be blatantly unconstitutional. The 1950s weren't all sock hops and soda fountains. For all the nostalgia, it was a time when safety, equality, and science still had a long way to go. What once passed as normal is now illegal, restricted, or unthinkable. It makes you wonder, what are we doing today that future generations will find shocking? If you enjoyed this trip through time, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos, and drop a comment. Which of these surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments.